My guest today is Mike Cosper, musician, pastor, author, media company president, a podcaster who's always engaging culture in a very constructive way.
Cars, coffee, theology.
All right, well, thanks, man, for joining me. The question I like to ask everybody is, what was your first car?
My first car was a 1988 champagne-colored Lincoln Town Car.
Nice. Okay.
It was
What's the story behind that?
I was 16, 17, something like that, and it had been my mom's car. My parents were always like very frugal about cars. They bought cars used and they drove them into the ground, which I think is a good approach. In high school, you're just grateful to have a car.
Yeah.
The thing had a huge engine.
Yeah. Is that a V8?
It had a V8.
Wow.
It had a big, loud V8. And, you know, it's like driving a cop car. Like, you just kind of get used to the angles and drive the heck out of it.
So you are, obviously we've known each other a little while, but for the last couple of years, you've been the executive director of Harbor Media. Mm-hmm. And before that, pastor in various capacities at Sojourn for a number of years.
Yep.
And your byline, I believe, is creating content, or maybe that's not quite right. I can't look at my notes right now while I'm driving, so I don't kill somebody. But something about for Christians in a post-Christian world.
Yeah, that's kind of.
What part of I'm missing?
That's it. I think everything that I'm doing, you know, I'm living sort of in two worlds right now because I have a foot in the world of the sort of startup entrepreneur world where I'm running this podcast company.
Right.
But you know, I continue to kind of write and speak and do things in the Christian marketplace, and for that, it's definitely the consistent themes for me are more or less how do we live the Christian life, how do we practice spiritual formation in a post-Christian culture.
If you would choose a number between 1 and 160,
okay,
for me, and say it out loud, not just in your heart.
Sure. Okay. 112.
112. Okay. So, in addition to all the other things you do, you are
nice.
an author. So, if you would turn to page 112 of Recapturing the Wonder, and those aren't my markings in there. I have that book, and I lost it in my messy office, so I had to borrow some. I do. So I had to borrow somebody else's, and so those aren't my markings. But turn to page 112 and read first paragraph there.
The first paragraph that's a whole paragraph?
Whatever you want.
Because the first paragraph, but it's a whole paragraph, is a good one because it's Robert Capon.
Good.
Robert Capon wrote, "Man's real work is to look at the things of the world and to love them for what they are. That is, after all, what God does. And man was not made in God's image for nothing." For Capon, attention is the paterfamilias of all human innovation and creativity. Here's more Capon. "How much curious and loving attention was expended by the first man who looked hard enough at the insides of trees, the entrails of cats, the hind ends of horses, and the juice of pine trees to realize that he could turn them all into the first fiddle. No doubt his wife urged him to get up and do something useful."
That is a great paragraph. I'm glad you chose that page because it's actually one of my favorite chapters from the book, and that is a great quote too.
I think my goal in this chapter is to help people understand that the degree to which they're paying attention to the world is the degree to which they're able to be grateful to God for it, and truly able to appreciate it. And I think so much of what, so much of the world that we live in is just hammering at us to try and distract us and to prevent us from actually paying attention to the things around us.
And that's a problem because
we're numb, we're bored, we're disenchanted. Yeah, we're disenchanted. And I think that's true in the sense of like our loss of wonder. It's true in the sense as well of, because we've been formed, I don't know how much you want to get into Charles Taylor here, but we're formed by a kind of secular consciousness that he uses this phrase, the imminent frame. I like to think of it as sort of like there's this roof on our thinking, and anytime any kind of sort of transcendent thought or experience wells up within us, we bump our heads on this roof that tells us you're going someplace where nothing exists, And so we leaves you in this place where it's like, well, I mean, this is nice for what it is. It's all gonna, just be destroyed in a fireball in 80 million years when the universe collapses in on itself again. And we're supposed to be happy that at least we have this moment, right? That's the line.
The secular age doesn't resource a very meaningful life. Then
Right.
in light of that,
Yeah,
that's what you're getting at, right?
for sure.
Thank you. When I was reading the book, I was reminded of C.S. Lewis's great essay on bicycles. I don't remember if that came up. Do you know that essay?
I don't know that essay. No.
Oh, you'll want to go read it. You greatly enjoy it. He uses the categories of 4 stages of life, and he uses the image of his experience with bicycles. And the 4 stages are unenchantment. So like with the bicycle, when he was very young, before he learned to ride a bike, he didn't have any knowledge of what a bicycle could do for his life, and et cetera. And then there's time of enchantment, where his experience of just as a young boy, riding a bicycle and going far and being able to run through the dappled light of the trees, et cetera. And then there comes a time of disenchantment, where as an adult, then you going up hills and just the hassle of getting placed on a bicycle, et cetera. And then what you need to get to is a place of re-enchantment, where you come to sort of appreciate the bicycle again and can experience the joys that it brings. And I read that when I was in my 20s, and it rang true to me then, and has continued to, just this whole experience of life of I think I'll park over here.
Yeah.
This whole experience of life of going through those stages of unenchantment, disenchantment, or enchantment, disenchantment, re-enchantment.
Yeah.
And
I mean, my cynicism says I think that the problem is that quite a few of us have grown up in such a way that we never got the enchantment experience in the first place.
Yeah, that's probably true. That wasn't a very good parking job.
I'm terrible at parking. My wife is horrifically embarrassed by my parking.
Okay.
Like, as I've gotten older, I feel like I'm a pretty good driver. I've had one real wreck that was my fault.
Right.
And that's it. But I can't park, save my life anymore. It's like,
getting worse.
It's a skill that's leaving me.
Right. So parallel parking is right out.
Don't even try.
Don't even try.
I don't even try.
That ship has sailed. No more
Like
parallel
making this parking space, I would be at an angle, and she'd open her door, and she'd just look at me and just sigh and roll her eyes.
Yeah.
It'd be very depressing.
That's what love's all about. All right. Awesome. This is your new book on Esther. What's the title? I don't have it in front of me there.
Faith Among the Faithless.
That's right.
Here you go.
There you go.
Fine folks. Learning from
See the
Esther
link.
how to live in a world gone mad.
Yep.
I just got in trouble on the internet over this yesterday on Twitter.
Oh, really?
I can tell you that
All
story.
right, please do.
So I got in trouble on Twitter because Jasmine Holmes, who's a wonderful human being, Jasmine wrote a review of the book,
Okay.
and they published it at the Gospel Coalition.
All right.
And there's a line late in the book where I talk about how Esther, once she has her spiritual awakening and comes back, she's like a prodigal daughter, coming home to her identity as a Jew and all this. And there's sort of this tribe of watch blogging folks who, God bless them, are doing good work and kind of calling out, misogyny and abuse and all that kind of stuff. That's stuff they're on the watch for. They took that to mean that the only way that I understood, Esther was as a prodigal. So I got a very real scolding over, Esther was a victim and she was trafficked and she was raped and she was this and I'm just sitting
Like you were denying that
I
or
was denying that.
something,
And so
right?
I'm just sitting there watching this happen on Twitter, and my wife is going, don't engage,
Yeah,
don't engage.
totally.
Nothing's good's going to come from this. But I'm like, if they read the book, they'd see that I say exactly all of this.
So what'd you do?
I didn't say a word.
You didn't say a word?
Didn't say a word.
So far, I've never
So
responded,
far.
but I also don't have as much going on as
But
you
I
do.
think what's troubling to me about the whole thing, and if I was going to say anything, I would say this: if the definition, if the way we define Esther is she was a victim, full stop, then we're actually dehumanizing her, because she was a victim, but she has agency, she has responsibility.
Agency. Yeah, right.
Daniel was a victim. Daniel was kidnapped, taken from his home, put into this harsh environment and told, bow down to the statues or we're going to murder you. And he said, I'm sorry. He said, take my life, And do we respect Esther enough to say she should have the same level of responsibility in spite of what she's been through? She still has the same level of responsibility.
And thereby honor.
Yeah.
Agency is what brings honor.
And ultimately, she deserves the same kind of honor as Daniel because she came around to that situation.
Yep.
But we have to deal with the messy reality that for a while she didn't. She was complicit, and she was very comfortable as a Persian in the Persian court. And Mordecai has to more or less threaten her in order to get her to wake up and go, okay, I'm going to do it.
And unfortunately, all that doesn't fit in a tweet.
In a tweet.
Right.
None of that fits in a tweet. And no matter how many tweets you send, they don't care.
One of 16.
Right. So I even thought, I was even so bothered by it, I was like, I'm gonna air this out in my newsletter this week that I send out. And then I was like, why bother them with your stupid Twitter crises? That's absurd. So I'm just gonna air it here.
There you
Tell
go.
all your friends about this.
That's what we're here for.
Solving
Twitter
that's
problems.
Right. Someone was wrong on the internet, and I let it go because I'm the bigger person.
Until this moment on the internet.
Until now, of course.
Exactly. Yeah, that's good. Well, it's an interesting thing you bring up Daniel, which I thought was a very insightful. But you want to say more about it? The parallel between Daniel and Esther, but also the differences between their stories.
Yeah.
And maybe you want to say something about that in light of what you're trying to argue in this book.
Yeah. No, I think Esther is the book for Christians in a post-Christian culture because most of us, this kind of brings us full circle to talking about formative traditions.
Yeah.
You look at Daniel's formative experience, he was probably, as I understand it, he was probably around 15 years old before he was taken into exile. So he has these primary years of his life spent in Jerusalem, at the temple, experiencing all of the formative traditions that would have gone along with being a Jew in Jerusalem. And so all of that is sort of built in to his wiring before he has to go stand before the king and answer for himself.
Make dietary choices.
Exactly. Where Esther, her parents have died. She's an orphan. She has a Jewish name that, if you read the story, it seems to imply she has a Jewish name that was probably given to her by her parents, who died for who knows what reason. It could have been sickness, could have been they were killed by the Persians, it could have been all kinds of things. So when she comes to live with her cousin, her name is Esther. Her cousin has a Persian name, so he probably gave her that Persian name.
And it obviously works better for her in that society to have the Persian name.
Yeah,
than the
exactly.
Clearly Jewish name.
And so nobody knows they're Jewish.
Yeah.
When she goes into the palace, he tells her to do exactly what they tell her to do. So she's eating from the king's table. It's the opposite of Daniel all the way up until Esther chapter 4, when she has to decide, am I going to risk my life on behalf of the Jewish people?
So sorry, let me pause you there. That's so fascinating because it's hard to believe that Jewish people wouldn't have been aware of those parallels because that's how they thought about Scripture.
Yeah.
How the story of Joseph and Daniel are the same story.
Yeah.
Right? The person who has dreams and ends up ruling over and thereby saving the Jewish people through the most powerful nation. All these parallels. So do you think people were conscious, or is there any evidence of people in the Targumim or something comparing Daniel and Esther? Or I haven't read in that area at all. I have no idea.
You know what's interesting? I don't know the answer to that question. What I do know is, as I read some Jewish scholars, particularly Yoram Hazoni, on the Book of Esther and on the Bible, the Old Testament more generally.
Yep.
One of the things that came out that was so surprising to me is the consensus from a lot of Jewish scholars, and there's some debate over this obviously, but there seems to be some consensus that we don't necessarily need to revere Joseph as much as Joseph gets revered, because in many ways Joseph was a compliant court Jew. He humiliates his dad and his brothers when they show up.
Right.
And then when the story is all said and done, the Jews are enslaved in Egypt for the next 400 years. And so we sort of turn him into this Christ character, Christ figure that saves his brothers from famine and all of this kind of stuff. And and Jewish readers kind of scratch their heads and go, I don't know if he's a good guy or not.
Interesting.
I thought that was just fascinating.
That is. Yeah, that is interesting.
But yeah, in the Jewish literature that I read, there was a lot of comparisons made between Esther and Daniel.
See, I've missed that. Yeah, that is interesting.
And
Okay.
just the contrast between the two characters. And so I make the argument, like, I think Esther is a book for us and for our times, because most of us have grown up without the kind of formative experience that Daniel had. And so we got to find our way.
Very nice current appropriation. That's excellent.
And then beautifully, the end of the book, how does the book of Esther end? It ends with the inauguration of a new tradition meant to remind them of this story and call them back to their identity.
Nice liturgical formation there.
Yeah, exactly.
brilliant.
So it's coming back to tradition.
So what are you working on now?
Ironically enough, sitting in the car with Jonathan Pennington, I'm working on a book that I think is going
How
to
to
be a book.
really read the Gospels wisely.
How to read the
Sermon on the Mount
Gospels
and suckiness.
not so wisely.
Right.
How to foolishly read the Sermon on the Mount. No, I've got an idea for a book on looking at the Sermon on the Mount, sort of like a practical guide for emotional health.
All right.
Almost in a way that even even somebody who's fairly disinterested in Jesus might read the book and go, like, just see the compelling case for if you put these things into practice, how does it transform your life?
Yeah.
What does a life without anger and holding grudges look like? What is a life without lust? What is a life with a posture of forgiveness and grace?
Poverty of spirit.
Yeah, anxiety, the practical ways
Yeah,
of thinking about
that's
anxiety and all of that. And so,
What led you to that? Have you read Robert Roberts? Do you know the
I don't know that
Christian
book.
psychologist Robert C. Roberts?
No.
He's actually done a lot on a Christian psychology perspective,
okay.
including using the sermon. So I'm sure you'll find some help there. I'm sure you also have a contribution to make beyond what he says, but
No, I'd
that'd
love
be
to see
one
that.
resource to look at.
Yeah, what got me there was personal experience, actually. Kind of walking through a dark season of my own life, and a mentor of mine who's a spiritual direction, certified spiritual director through the Renovari Institute,
Okay.
which is Dallas Willard and Richard
Yep.
Foster's
Yep.
organization. I met with him 2 or 3 times, and his counsel to me was, I think you need to spend a couple of months just sitting in the Sermon on the Mount.
Really?
Just every day.
All right.
Just, don't feel like you need to read the whole thing every day. Read a few verses, meditate on them, sit with them, and let the sermon do its work on you.
That's awesome.
And
I guess that's Dallas Willard's influence on them,
yeah,
right, as well.
for sure.
Right.
And so doing that has been
Huh.
really life transforming for me, and particularly in working through issues of forgiveness and anger, and
Yeah.
seeing the burden that they bear, that how toxic they can be, and so yeah, that's maybe what I'm doing next.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's something that
Well, like all artists, you probably have 18 awesome ideas
Right.
that are all 1/3 done. Or at least I'll speak for myself. All right. So if you reach down in the side pocket there, you'll see
Yep.
a bunch of envelopes of different colors.
okay.
You just choose one of those, whatever one you want.
Okay.
And in them are random questions. I don't know what's in each of them as well.
All
And
right.
I'll have you answer the question, and then I'll commit to answering the question as well. So
All right. Here we go.
add a little random element.
What's the oldest thing you own? Ooh. The oldest thing that I own is I have a first edition, library edition of Thomas Merton's The Seven-Story Mountain.
Yeah.
So it's the library edition, so it doesn't have the cool cover. It's got like a different cover. It's a weird edition of the book.
Did
but
you
it's,
sort of seek that out, or you just found it sometime?
whenever I go to used bookstores, I go look for used Merton
Yeah,
and first edition Merton stuff, and I've got a handful of them, first editions. I mean, the first edition Seven-Story Mountain is like $1,200 or $1,500 these days.
Is it really?
So
what year?
But this one is,
50,
a couple $100.
late 50s, would that be?
yeah, late
Or
maybe
is it
mid-50s.
mid-50s?
I'd have to
Okay.
look at it, but
Yeah,
yeah, I
very
think it was
cool.
around 52, 53.
Where do you keep it? Yeah, it's like
It's like on
separate-
display.
Okay.
Yeah,
nice.
it's like sitting out.
I don't know. I'm kind of the same boat. I don't have a catalog in my mind of oldest things, but the first thing that came to mind that is old and that I see every day is that my grandfather, maternal grandfather, so my mom's father, was an artist, and my mom was too, and a bunch of artists in my family. He spent most of his life he couldn't make a living as an artist in Depression era Southern Georgia, so he was a draftsman for the railroad, which means he drew the blueprints of engines and, in the old days when it was all drawn out. So, he used his artistic skill to do that, but he did things on the side, cartoons and stuff. But at some point, he had drawn a profile in pencil, a large one, and it's framed, of my father, who then died shortly after that. My dad died suddenly in 1972 of a brain aneurysm. And so makes that picture of my father near the end of his life suddenly, and none of us knew that, of course, that he was going to die, makes it all the more valuable and precious, because it was probably one of the last things, pictures of him even.
Wow.
And my sister had it forever. I didn't even know it existed, but then a few years ago she gave it to me because I guess I look exactly like him from the pictures. And so it's hanging in our piano room, and I see it every day. And so again, I don't really know how old it is. I guess it's probably from the 60s, so we probably have older things, but in terms of just something valuable.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, it's been great, man.
Yeah, man, absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Glad to do it.
If you'll indulge me
Okay.
with one more thing.
All right.
Welcome to another edition of Between Two Windows. I'm your host, Jonathan Pennington. My guest today is Mike Cosper, Mike Cosper, and he's the host of a podcast, Cultivated, which I presume is kind of like a Rotten Tomatoes for various cults, where you evaluate cults.
Yeah, that's good.
Anyways,
On target.
good to have you on the show. Have I told you I like Cultivated? No?
No. I've heard that about you.
Good.
Good to be with you.
I just couldn't resist.
I know.
And you're the perfect person to do my bad impersonation of Zach Galifianakis.
I like it.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. 3 really quick things. If you like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and connect with us on social media. We'd really appreciate it. Secondly, check out the comment section below. We've put a bunch of program notes and links to interesting things there. And third, check out some of our episodes you can see linked here. Thanks. We'll see you on the road. Peace.